I don't have a set way of doing this. So basically, we're not here to blame anybody. It's usually the first case that gets the blame, but it had to start someplace else first before it got here. The story kind of is that there were 7 dead cattle in this pasture, and they thought it was bad water, and the water was bad. So they traveled north, and then 2 more died on there, and 3 or 4 days later, everything was good. But 9 days later, there were 41 dead ones. And when I got that story, that made me suspect anthrax, because anthrax has a 1 to 2 week incubation period. So you get a dead one, and then you get cows will sniff around that dead one, and then a week later you'll get a whole bunch more dead ones. And then a week later, a whole bunch more. That's just the way the disease progresses. Because the dead cow is the main way of spreading the disease. We talk about lots of other things to worry about, but it's the dead cow that is really the problem. So when the cattle were moved from here to here, and you had all the dead cows, and you had all the calves in here that didn't have any mamas, and they broke into the fence over to here, and this guy lost a cow. They had to trail from here to home, and they went through this pasture, and they lost a cow and a calf, trailing through. But there was also a dead cow right in the corner, and he had some cows that crawled out into that pasture, so they could have brought it in. And if I get this wrong, just please correct me. I mean, I have all the exact numbers right, but this is kind of the way I take it. And this cow was, one cow in this pasture was the only one that's dead there. There's 3 dead cows over here that have no contact with any of the others, as far as we can tell. They weren't even on Sulphur Creek since this spring. They've been on the flat. So, as far as we know, this is a new case. So, that means that anybody that has a dead cow could be a new case someplace. So, the first thing you should do, if you're worried, is rag your pasture. If you find a dead one, put panels around it before you do anything else. And maybe fly spray. Dr. Tidro just told me about a paper he read that the flies that produce maggots can be responsible for spreading spores. They can eat on a carcass, go out and land on a leaf, poop on it, and leave spores there. There was a study out of Texas, and that's how they got deer infected, was through spores spread by flies. Biting flies experimentally can transmit it, but it is probably low. If it was higher, I think we would see more dead calves. Dr. Tidro from the state vet office, again, he went back over anthrax results since the 80s, and it has always been that way. Calves are not affected. Very little of them. So we have maybe total 70 dead calves here and 6 dead calves, maybe 5 or 6 calves. So that's typical. So when you vaccinate, so if you have a herd that's no dead ones, I think you can just go in and vaccinate your cows to protect the calves. You don't have to do the cows and the calves, just the cows. That's different if you have a dead one and it's confirmed, then you have to do cows and calves. There's bulls, absolutely, you gotta do bulls. Most of the textbooks say bulls are more susceptible than cows. if you have a bull, yes. I know there's more. I know you got a million questions.
How careful do the people out that are dealing with the sick cows? I've heard that this is transferable to humans.
It is transferable to humans. There's 3 different ways it gets into humans. Through the skin, it cuts on your hand. That's called wool sorter's disease. People who sort wool in the old days, they would get anthrax on their skin. You can get it by eating it, especially if you have abrasions in your mouth. And inhalation of spores is extremely deadly. Cattle and sheep are extremely susceptible. Humans are kind of intermediately susceptible. It's difficult to inhale the spores. I mean, the cow is right down there nose to nose with it, and you're standing up this high. So it's difficult. Since 1955 to 1995, so 40 years, there have been 255 cases of anthrax in humans with 20 deaths. So with all that exposure over 40 years, it hasn't been a huge issue. And the number of deaths in the 50s, or the number of cases in the 50s, like 40 or 50 a year, that has dropped off to like 10 a year. So we have a lot less human exposure. As far as the first case goes, anthrax, as far as we know, lives in the soil for 50 years, maybe more. And if there was anthrax here 50 years ago, and they buried it just like we are now, and you come through and put in a water line, and go through an anthrax burial site, you bring those spores up, and they're still alive. If you dig a post hole and hit an anthrax burial site, you bring the spores up. If they're trenching in the fiber optic cables, you could be exposing old spores. As Dr. Winger pointed out, 20 years ago on home burgers, it was right up here on Sulphur Creek. Spring rains could have washed the spores down Sulphur Creek, and Sulphur Creek dried up, and all those spores would be left on the shore. So we don't know, we'll never know where this came from, but those are all possible scenarios.
So Jim, all these burial sites down there now, is the state can't come in and mark on them, so they never get dug up. That is a big.
This is Dr. Todd Tidro from the state vet office. Arlen's out here, that's why he's sitting up front.
Right. Todd Tedder with the state veterans office and Lunch Board. I don't like microphones, so I'll do my best with it. So, historically, we have not marked the burial sites, but the last few years, probably since 2015, we've been marking with GPS waypoints and then sharing that with whoever owns the land, right? And the reason we probably didn't do it previously is so our disease investigation records are not foiable, they're not public record, so we don't say names. If you guys have been around trick, y'all get mad at us because we won't tell you who has it. We've had several of those phone calls. But what we do is we make sure all the neighbors surrounding these things know about it, right? So we have been keeping that data the last several years. But the thing that makes me nervous is if it does become foiable, then is that information going to be made public? So it's kind of a slippery slope, I guess. Do you have a suggestion for us? Do you want us to keep them? Does nobody want us to keep them?
Well, it's an iffy. If somebody goes in there to search, this is gonna drop right again.
Well, it can bring them up, yes, but, so, the thing we should focus on here is that anthrax is in the environment anyway. It's kind of clear across our state. going back historically, I looked through records from the thirties and our annual reports, they didn't have it broken down by county, I was hoping they would. We just said, yeah, 250 cases of anthrax this year. You know, and we read the annual reports year after year, and there was at least anywhere from 50 to 250 cases of anthrax back in the thirties and forties and fifties. But all those, we don't know where those burial sites are at, nobody knows. You know, this is historical information that has been passed down from family to family.
And some of those areas weren't even buried, they just left,
Correct.
getting buried.
And the reason we have anthrax here is because of viral use for home employment. And anthrax was one of those, and those didn't get buried either. So, you know, I think the thing to focus on is that anthrax is in the environment, it's probably in, somewhere in everybody's pastures out here. I would guess.
We're never gonna prevent, exposure forever, but the good news is, the vaccine is very effective. And most of you here will probably be vaccinating the rest of your life, because we know the spores last that long. It's not a bad deal. I mean, it's something we can fix. It's a very good vaccine. And I have clients that have used it. They're still using it for these last 50 years.
Do you have to do that right in the spring, or can you do that anytime during the year?
Spring is best, but the vaccine is very good. We have,
Sorry to interrupt you. Did everybody hear that question? I just want to make sure everybody heard that. Sure.
I have a lot of clients, I call this the MJ effect. MJ gives all the shots when I'm running through the chute, and it's just handier if she does it, so. So we've gone to a lot of fall shots with anthrax included, and how do you know if you're protecting them? I mean, the disease is so rare. I would think that we are, because I think that vaccine is very good. So I think yes, maybe this first year I would recommend doing it in the spring, but then if you wanted to go fall after that, you probably could. If we do it this fall, one dose is probably sufficient unless you have a confirmed case on your place. Because you're looking at only protecting them for about a month. Once the temperature gets below 60, we almost never have an anthrax case. So if our high temperature drops, then we're kind of out of the anthrax season. So one dose is going to protect us. And the vaccine can take effect in as little as 1 week. I mean, it will show some improvement. So
some information that Dr. Stengel doesn't have, the temperature. It's right on a lot of that because it is seen mostly in the summertime, June, July, August, September. But there is some data out there, and actually my neighbor across the road from my house had it in March, and some yearling heifers, and the gurus that do a lot of anthrax research and asked me to grab a bunch of stuff from the hay field, or the feeder, and some of the mud that was on the hay that was in the mass, that mud the dirt that I brought to him had tons and tons of anthrax in it, spores. So it was stuff that was harvested. You know, finally I run the cutter, I always get too deep, so then the dirt and the mud goes into the bales, and then we feed them, and that's where the source was at, is from the hay. So that's another one that, where it shows up. So again, in the environment, the big thing, vaccine is fantastic.
there was a case in Yankton quite a while ago. They had this outbreak of anthrax, and it was all along this county road. Well, they just re-gravelled the road, and where they took the gravel from was an old anthrax burial site. So they re-gravelled the road with anthrax and the dust coming off of there, and they had an outbreak all along that road.
So if you remember the whole pipeline stuff, right? I was gonna go through my friends in Jones County, and part of the deal that they made when they were doing, trying to get land, and said, well, why don't you pay for my anthrax vaccine for
every spring or every fall, we do it once a year.
Okay. So, all right. Oh, just for you talking about your neighbor, was that paid that he was from his own place or not paid his lot?
And he's asking if it was paid from his own place or purchased middles from his place.
Okay.
Can deer and antelope die from it, or get?
Can antelope get it? Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, Bob Long brought up that issue, what should I tell my animal hunters? And the state vet's official position was, they can hunt with full disclosure as long as they know there's anthrax. My personal opinion is, I wouldn't want to touch them. I mean, this can be 1 to 2 hours from the time between a cow was sick and she was dead. So how would you know that antelope was incubating?
So can they spread the board, like walking through?
Probably,
Coyote?
probably. They'll eat on it, they'll pass through their stool, yeah, walk on their feet. But again, the main mode of transmission is the dead calf. That,
So, these cattle that are dying of anthrax, they need to be burned and buried.
So our state rule says burned, and then we ask that stuff be buried as well, but looking across the countryside, burning is probably not real smart. You know, we don't want to be responsible for big wildfire.
There is a requirement,
So-
so state that they need to be burned.
Well, our state law says that, yes. It does say that, but you gotta use some common sense and discretion on 40-mile-an-hour winds and really dry grass, right? So the big thing is if you get them buried, you wanna get them buried with at least 4 foot of dirt on top of them. So it's pretty deep hole.
You got more feet of dirt on top of them, they was.
Not necessarily. So the burning, the reason for the burning is the thought that the bacteria is still in the carcass and it hasn't formed spores that needs to see oxygen to form the spores, right? So if you bury it, you eliminate a lot of that oxygen too. But the burning is gonna do that, and it's basically to kill off the bacteria as soon as you can. And then there's less spores that are gonna be out in the environment. So that's kind of the thought there. And the other thing is, you definitely don't want to put lime out in the pit, lights out in soils. It'll help preserve the spores and live longer. No lime, and everybody lives without them, so soils out much further, so that's why anthrax survives out here. One thing to bring up too, like Dr. Singh was saying, the cow, so that's the same thing, right? The cow is full of the bacteria, and then as they decompose and blood and other things come out, that's when you get the spores. So the spores are the actual, what's gonna be, it's not contagious from one cow to another. If they gotta consume those spores somewhere, but from dead carcasses, that's where the spores get left out into the environment.
Do you find that you have more cases of anthrax in your soils in different parts of the country where you have heavier soils versus light soils like sandy soils? Or has that ever made much difference?
I don't know if that's really been studied that much, but I do know, every state around us gets it, we get it. I guess I'd have to talk to my friends in Nebraska that have the sand hills. But, they probably sure could throw it up to the top easier and, more readily available on these clay type soils than it would the sandy stuff where you sift through. Dr. Weaver, you know any?
I've heard of cases down in Nebraska on the sending soil. So they can have it.
a big factor is the pH. Alkaline soils tend to preserve the soils, preserve the spores better. So you got alkali around your dams, you have probably alkaline soils. So that's a higher pH, better anthrax survival.
Because I just know in my part of the country, I've never heard of, anybody ever had an anthrax, really in more sandy part of the country. I'm like right where I am.
You know,
We always have been susceptible.
in the book on zoonoses, how diseases from animals are transmitted to humans, South Dakota is listed as #1 state, and Nebraska, Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, down there, we've got the most anthrax in those states. So soil type does make a difference. And we actually discussed that with Caden, you know, and the cows are locked in a corral, and so he's got contaminated lot there, and if we treat it with quicklime, not limestone, quicklime, calcium oxide, it'll raise the pH and maybe get rid of some of those spores that are in the ground.
You're a fine one sick with anthrax?
Sorry, I'm running here, what was that?
You ever find one that's sick with anthrax?
Yes. Most of the time you don't, they die so suddenly you don't see any symptoms. I saw 2 at Caden's when they were all locked in a lot there, and they were just off a little bit. They were dragging their hind legs, kind of, not dragging them behind them, but just not picking them up, just kind of dragging their toes, kind of wobbly in the back end. That's all I noticed. Maybe slight depression. One of those 2 cows, we got her in the chute and examined her, and the light wasn't really good by the time we were doing that, but I really couldn't find much wrong with her. And I took some blood from her, and it took 40 minutes for that blood to clot. Normal is less than 10. That's almost a dead ringer for anthrax, because anthrax keeps their blood from clotting. That's why you often hear that there's blood coming out of every orifice. Every textbook says that, but most of the cases I saw haven't been that way. But her blood was definitely thin. So I think we gave her a half dose of LA that night, and she survived. Dr. Jim Bain up in Frederick, South Dakota, he's been in practice 55 years. He told me about the dozens of cases he's had. He's had cows down and couldn't get up, and gave them 100 cc's of penicillin and couldn't find them the next day. It is easily treatable. This bug is easy to kill if you find them, which is one of the reasons why we have a positive herd. We go in with a half dose of LA200 for everything. We're gonna shut it down, and then go into antibiotics and get their immune system built up.
So Jim, when you're saying that, you say when backbeat kind of drag along, I've seen that because it's helping drill along, whatever. Does that shot, because you already gave the LA to them, did that shot take care of that?
I'm sorry, which shot?
Well, when I was going along, because like you were just saying, like anthrax, but you seen them cows down the cages, they're kind of dragging their hind feet along. It's like, you're not normal. But until you brought that to my attention, that's what I seen. A couple of cows just threw them in, and then I seen that, it's kind of dragging their hind legs, or hind feet, just kind of couldn't curl up.
Right.
And he already gave the shot of LA or normycin, whatever, but will that anthrax shot take care of that? Because I don't know if you want to back out on them cows and check them again, since we've done them 2 days ago.
So you're asking if you have a cow out there that's sick and you treat her, she gets better, do I need to?
Well, no, he already treated it, though.
Yeah, you've already treated her, so you don't know if you have anthrax or not.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, I seen it, and then we gave the anthrax shot a couple days later. And the cows, when they're gathering up, bringing them in, and that's what I seen. This cow's kind of just dragging their feet along. It's like, that ain't, I mean, I never, until you brought the attention of that, I never seen it.
I'm hardly here.
So one thing to also remember is anthrax creates a really high body temperature. These cows will be running 105, 6, 7 body temperatures. And one of the reasons why they knuckle over on their hind feet or drag their toes is because of the high fever. Why they act lethargic and dopey and their ears are kind of doing this. It's because of the high fever. So the antibiotics get in there and help take care of that fever. So once, by killing the bacteria, we help that body out when we drop their body temperature. So what we're seeing is the clinical signs of the high fever, not necessarily the clinical signs of anthrax. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So if you're still seeing that kind of behavior after you treat it with antibiotics, then A, maybe give her some more antibiotics, or B, maybe there might be something else going on that we're not getting that fever down. I don't know about anybody's theories with like Meade. Ketoprofen, the new Draxin ketoprofen is really good for decreasing body temperature. So that might be a second line of defense. You're still not taking care of those high fevers if you have one that survives.
Thank you.
He's doing such a good job, I don't think I can say anything.
Couple of questions have been asked. Can you give anthrax shots along with your fall shots? I'm saying yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you give fly pour on at the same time? And I would say absolutely. I think control the flies is also going to help us control the anthrax. Can you give your breeding shots along with the anthrax? I'd say yes. For one thing, anthrax is a gram-positive organism, and so the kind of toxins in it are different than the other shots we get, which are all gram-negative organisms. So it should not add a burden onto the cow's immune system. So sometimes we get into trouble by stacking too many gram-negative vaccines together. In this case, it's a gram-positive, so it's probably not going to hurt any of your vaccine programs.
It's also a 1cc. And it's also a 1 cc dose, so it's a very small amount, and it's been shown to be very easy on the immune system.
When you have a target anthrax area, how big an area away from that would you consider an anthrax-free area? I'm just saying, but like basically in the county, are you recommending everybody in the county a designated part of the county, or what's kind of common?
There are no boundaries.
Right.
I would say our whole state, we have cases in the East River, north, south, everywhere. If I were a cattle producer in South Dakota, we would give them anthrax vaccine.
What year was it, 2007, when they were all up and down the Cheyenne River?
05.
05? They were all connected, they just followed the river. And we had a drought from 2000 to 2008, so 05 was a drought year, 04 was really bad.
Are horses susceptible to this anthrax?
Yes, not as much as cows.
And can they be vaccinated?
Yes. The same vaccine is made for horses. I have never vaccinated one. So I don't know if they react to it.
So I vaccinated several of them in 2005, really pectoral muscle, and they get really sore. Sometimes swallowed by birds, so they do have a different reaction to the vaccine.
Pectoral muscles, he needs these chest muscles right down there. Yeah. think, just my guess, they got a longer nose, so it's harder to suck the anthrax up.
That's what they teach us for anatomy and stuff here.
When we get to drink a beer, we'll
They usually cover antibiotics for human handling.
With what?
For humans handling and working with the cases, going on antibiotics.
The treatment, right?
For humans, yeah.
Yeah. So if you have a dead work up, we mass treat everything with a half dose of LA.
She wants to talk about human.
Oh, human.
Sorry.
We're
It's very different.
Yeah, right, recommendations for, but.
we cannot do that.
So in the event of producer having a positive result, right, so it's a known case, the South Dakota Department of Health gets the information from the veterinarians of who that person is and they reach out, contact them, go through the risk, assessment of, do you need some prophylactic or do you need whatever to treat it. So the Department of Health will handle all that. And if you have any concern for yourself outside of that, if you're not, if they don't, just contact your physician.
The state vet called me, or the state health department called me, after the first case, and I told her about it, and of course with the first case, I posted the cow, and they said, oh, you're the highest risk ever. I mean, so, they said, talk to your physician and put me on 60 days of Cipro or 60 days of doxycycline. Doxycycline is the same class of compound as LA-200. So basically, they put me on LA-200 for 60 days. I'm not going to give you my opinion on that. That is between me and my physician. I did read a reference in the book on zoonoses, and they said that some people, when you inhale the spores, it can go into your lymph nodes in your lungs and stay there for 60 days. So that is their reasoning, I'm guessing, their reasoning for 60 days worth of antibiotics. Now, she said I was in danger of inhaling the spores because I opened up the carcass, which is false. There are no spores inside the carcass. And these bacteria are huge. I mean, they're twice the length of the width of a red blood cell. They're huge when it comes to bacteria. I could not stand up here and have a piece of dried blood on the floor and sniff it up. That's just impossible. I mean, so I understand where she's coming from, the state health department is coming from, and the reason they recommend you putting on Cipro is because of that anthrax terrorism threat back in 2001, 2002, and they thought that was weaponized, so it was penicillin resistant, and that is the reason for putting you on Cipro. If you have a choice, I wouldn't choose the Cipro, because it's not as easy on you. Doxycycline is cheaper and won't make you as sick. Baytril is one of our drugs, enrofloxacin. It is converted to Cipro, 50% of it is converted to Cipro in the liver. But the reason it's not a human drug is because if you take it, you feel like you've been drugged through a knothole. So they figured that out, so instead of making enrofloxacin, they made ciprofloxacin for people, which is what Baytril does for cattle. So there's no reason to go that high powered antibiotics, because I'm pretty sure it wasn't terrorists that brought anthrax to this country 50 years ago. And they didn't treat with antibiotics then. There's no reason for this bug to be resistant to anything.
So just to make sure nobody goes home scared. That stuff was weaponized, like you said. They made it so it was, the powder was light, was able to be inhaled. The anthrax that's in nature is very, very heavy, and it's in spores and it lays on the ground. And there's hardly any cases of inhalation anthrax from the stuff in the environment. Usually it's a lesion on your hand or your skin or somewhere is what happens.
The people that are probably most at risk are the ones that are out there burying the carcasses.
Those are the ones that I was thinking, people that are helping
Yes.
with the mop up and who aren't in contact with the state,
Yeah.
so they should be.
Those people that are burying the carcasses, you're stirring up the dust, you're digging the hole, you're scraping the dirt in. Those people are probably the most at risk.
Some of those folks here, have you not been contacted by the Department of Health? No,
Well,
usually what they
sometimes
do
it's
is,
volunteer, you
Right,
know,
so-
that there wouldn't be names given necessarily.
so usually what they'll do is they'll contact the producer and then they'll ask names of those that helped. And then they'll go further out to reach out to those folks too. So if they're doing that, if they're not, I'll
I
leave it
will
with them
there
to make sure.
too, because I know.
Okay. Okay.
They contacted me yesterday. They contacted me yesterday, the state health did. And she asked me through a few questions on how, or who was
Take stuff off
exposed.
the table. Hear you back there?
The state health, called me yesterday and she asked me who all was involved with them, with the dead carcasses. I told her it was mainly me and my daughter. And so then she asked me how close, what all we've done to it. And I said that we basically found the ear tag on my calf. Tiffany used the stick, found the ear tag on my calf. She said that we were not at risk very much. And then she gave us the symptoms of what we should watch for. And she said after that, if you develop a symptom, don't be scared to go to your doctor. And when you do go to your doctor, say you have been exposed to anthrax. And then she left me with a number for more questions.
So she didn't tell you to go on antibiotics for 60 days?
No.
I discussion.
Her treatment plan, if we decided I needed it, was 7 days of something. And then I think it was wait 10 days and then go on another 7 days of the same drug. Is that all right?
Yep.
So when I was exposed many years ago, we went out to the guy's place, bad water, right? Because that's the first thing we think of in this country. Especially if Sulphur Creek is mentioned in any of the conversation. And so I got this dead cow, I got my little pink gloves on, ripped this cow open, you know, and I'm digging around, and the splene's really huge, and by the time I'm done, the anthrax bells are going off in my head. And I'm looking around these other deads laying, and I'm like, we might have a problem, this is not water. And by the time I'm done, I've got blood all over me, and, take a little piece of spleen, send it off, and it is positive for anthrax. And they did put me on Cipro. So if you do have to go to your healthcare provider, do not get put on Cipro, okay? It directs hell with your immune system. So that's just my experience with that. And I had to be on a procedure. It was not.
There was another case, the vet from Sioux Nation and a feed rep were going out to this guy's place and they were selling feed, is what they were doing. He said, well, I got this dead cow here, can you tell me what's wrong with her? And so they went out there and posted her with bare hands and a pocket knife. Had blood everywhere, and it came back positive. So, I don't know what they put them on antibiotics, but I'm pretty sure that was probably a 60-day deal too.
Little wind credit,
For what?
little wind.
He wants to know when, right?
Wind?
Fly. Fly over.
Like Dr. Stengel said earlier, there's some research and literature out there that says that flags contribute to the distribution of the spores. So they feed on a carcass that's infected, and they'll get it, and then they fly away, a little ways off, and defecate and throw up. Yeah, flies probably don't fly that far, but it moves around with flies. So that's the reason why you want to get rid of the carcasses as quickly as possible. Get them in the ground, get them buried, so the flies aren't distributing more spores.
I didn't know that, so I almost wish I had known that if you found a dead cow, you know, one of the first things besides putting panels around it, go out there, put some cleanup around there, kill those flies. Why not? And keep it from spreading.
What about equipment that you would have to use to dispose of carcasses? Is it recommended that they be disinfected or whatever? I would imagine you can have spores on metal like on the pucker of a tractor or backhoe or something such as this, is this correct?
Absolutely, yeah. 10% Clorox solution on the bucket. I've been using it on my tires when I leave places and the soles of my feet before I get in the pickup.
Kind of related to that, this time of year, we don't ranch like we did 50 years ago. People transport livestock all over hell. If those spores, if that animal can be infected for a while before it dies, do people in the transportation of livestock need to be concerned that they can haul a load of calves from this place to the sale barn? Can we pack that around in a cattle pot?
What are you worried about? So the question was, like livestock transporters, can you transport that around from one place to the other, you know, with your cattle pot? Probably highly unlikely, but there's always that slim chance. So but you just want to make sure that you keep your, and more time and effort is going to be a pain in the rear, you know, clean out your pots, you know, between.
But this time of year, that doesn't happen between every load.
Yeah,
It just doesn't.
logistically it's a nightmare, but there is that slight chance.
Well, washing it out with water, clean it out, or do we have to? Should we
Most of the
put
time, since you're
some
running
lime in
this
it?
aluminum or stainless steel truck, you get the fecal material out and the body fluids out, you're probably good to go, because once it dries, it's less likely that you're gonna have bacteria and organisms there.
Okay.
But that's not 100%. You're just doing the best you can to prevent this from going around. Now, my question for the state was, what is the recommended quarantine period from like last dead to when we can safely move cattle off of that place? Because I know I've got clients that are needing to move calves, you know, sell calves, but they had a dead cow last week, so, or a few days ago. So what do I recommend to them?
So what we do, and so we can get to this to answer your question as well, in known cases, known where they're clinically and diagnostically positive, we ask them to stay quarantined for 30 days after the disposal of the last carcass. Yeah, and the science behind that, I'm not sure, that's probably the same hormone thing, right?
Right.
But it gives you that extra good feelings, okay, you know, if you have got your calves from sign, you have an infected herd, you know, we could work with you to say it's 2 or 3 days on side of that or something, just to make sure we're not moving around from a known place. But usually, historically, what's happened, and we see this, when you get an infected herd, you get them treated, you get them vaccinated, done deal. You don't have any more deaths, it shuts it all down. So we can probably shorten that up, but just for simplicity, that's what we've had in the days. Yep, and we'll deliver everybody that's added a written quarantine, so we can put it up on the wall of fame. And the quarantine from the state.
In answer, part of the answer to your question is, we're all probably already transporting anthrax all over the country. This disease is called wool sorter's disease. people who work sorting wools and in tanneries with hides would get anthrax on their hands. There's dust in the spores, there's spores in the dust on the hide. That case in 2005, didn't it start with a feedlot herd of buffalo? Buffalo have been in a feedlot since the fall. They've been in that feedlot and then they got anthrax. So it can be in the fur and it's probably already transported all over the nation.
At what point do you figure the odds as far as, basically, should I vaccinate, should I not vaccinate? If you've gone a long period of history in a certain part of the country where you haven't had anthrax, given the fact that in the next 30 days, there's going to be a lot of cattle, moving to town and the works. I mean, is this something right here and now that we should be, concerned about? I mean, doing tomorrow or the next day as far as an ounce of prevention or whatever, if you're not really faced with a problem in your given local area or whatever? What's your recommendation?
I think that's why we're all here. I mean, yeah, it's a problem. I think we need to just start vaccinating, whether you're got direct exposure or not. We have it in the area. We don't know the radius of this exposure, so yeah, it's relatively inexpensive and a very good vaccine. At this point, it's a no-brainer.
Do you recommend that for like 30 miles right there? I mean, we don't bring it together and do our fall. Is that soon enough vaccinate for that?
You'd be vaccinating for next year, not this year, because the temperature will be cold enough.
My question is, do we need to do it day after tomorrow or can we wait 6 weeks?
No, I would do it this year. I would vaccinate all the cows now, whether in conjunction with the preg test or not. You're not going to screw up selling your calves. Because if you protect your cow herd, then regardless whether you preg test or not, I mean, if you have a dead one tomorrow, you're not going to be able to sell calves for 30 days. You have to let them all through, give them LA, give them, and if you just get the anthrax now, because this is still hot enough, we can still get new cases. If you do it in conjunction with a preg test, you're going to get anthrax, because if you're not selling the cows, you're going to get anthrax to the opens too. So that's going to be a 42-day withdrawal. So you won't be able to sell your opens right away. But, I mean, it's a small price to pay if you leave that window open for one cow to get it and screw everything up.
So one thing to also think about is, this is the current, zone of active infection, okay? So if you were outside of the zone of active infection, and you were on wavering whether you wanted to vaccinate or not, think about this. If you're up here and you're out of the zone, by vaccinating, you are adding to that wall of protection, okay? So that this zone doesn't go like this, doesn't blow up on us. So if you're up here, out here, and you're saying, well, should I vaccinate or not? It's not even close to me. By vaccinating, you are essentially helping to put an apron around it. You're adding to that wall of protection. The vaccine is cheap. It's like $1 or a little bit less than $1 a dose. So that's why I encourage people to vaccinate. Even if, and actually Dr. Slett was always telling me that if you draw a line from where the Avans Road hits 212, and you go straight south to 34, this whole area is anthrax hotspots. There's historically been anthrax out here somewhere in the last 50 years. So just because it's here doesn't mean that it couldn't pop up here, or it couldn't pop up down here, or it couldn't pop up here. So if you vaccinate, you're essentially helping your neighbors, helping everybody else by putting that wall around it. So, but that's my recommendation to people who say, well, I don't have it, it's far away from me. I'm like, yeah, but if you vaccinate, then essentially we've helped the zone stay that small.
So,
How are you sitting for supply there, so it's not, or do you have enough on hand, so it's not gonna be an issue where people who are closer are gonna get shorted, or do you have enough to go around right now?
It's available, there's a lot.
Yeah. But on hand right now, you're stocked.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that's.
so Dr. Winger, to add to what she said, that's really, really good. The thing is, the $1 million question is what you have. Nobody knows when and where it's gonna show up, right? But it always shows up in non-vaccinated cattle. Never had her, I haven't seen a herd that's been vaccinated for anthrax, not anthrax. And whatever the environmental factors are, that bring it up, and maybe make it multiply or whatever, those aren't known, which is unfortunate. But that's what we're saying, the risk is, something in the environment is a risk, and that's why there's more of them coming up now than are vaccinated. And that could be any of the processes. I appreciate that she says they're in there, but I don't believe that line. You know, since I've been working for the
That's
state.
his experience, that's what he told me.
Correct, yep. And since I've been working with the state, I've seen it in Sanborn County, and Han County, and Forsyth County, you know, Assistant, so it's everywhere in our state. It's out there. It's just a matter of, you know, when it's gonna show itself and head and pop up.
That's correct. If you know that, yeah. That's correct. No, the anthrax vaccine. Vaccine is 42 days withdrawal.
If you're gonna sell open cows, they have to wait 42 days.
If you vaccinate, yes.
Anthrax,
If they have the anthrax vaccine, yes.
so if you're correct, that can be not to your
Sure.
If you wanna sell them, I mean.
If you want to sell them, yes. If you've already got your calves done, the point I'm making is that, and I'm doing that for some of my clients, we're bumping up the preg testing because of the risk. They're not gonna sell their calves for 3 weeks. So the opens are gonna be out there with the calves on them. So I want those opens protected. I don't want an open cow, I don't wanna save $1 on an open cow and have her die and screw up everything.
What's your recommendation on some of the, I've got a load of them going to the next week for the sale?
What's that?
We're gonna be shipping calves a bunch of cars this next week. Is that a big deal? Should we go ahead and ship them, or should we hold them?
I should, you don't have it, so. You've probably been exposed somewhat, I mean, your whole career. I mean, you could never make a claim to say that you don't have anthrax when you sell them. I mean, if you know you have it, then that's a different story, but just say, well, there's been some in the area. I don't think any place in the state can say that.
Hardly any gets transmitted.
That's correct. Well, it's not a big deal for calves, they're gonna go on feed. It says 42 days from slaughter. It's 42 days from slaughter, so if you vaccinate your calves and sold, I mean, they're not gonna be slaughtered in the 42 days. But a cow would, an open cow could be slaughtered in the 42-day range. So 42 days from slaughter, not 42 days to sell.
Yeah, all vaccines and antibiotics have slaughter before one.
I know. Todd, you know your rates? Bruce Stevens?
I didn't know.
So I'm just the outlier here. I'm recommending that if you're ever, and you've had a positive diagnosis, that I am recommending when you give the vaccine to change needles between animals. Because you don't know if you have this animal here, who's not showing any clinical signs, and you vaccinate her, and you go to the next animal, you could possibly infect that animal. And that's just with the vaccine needles. Now your antibiotic needle, you can set up your little soap pan, disinfectant pan, you know, like we do, and clean that needle off. Your antibiotic. But if you're just vaccinating and you don't have any positives, and you're just doing the prevention, and if you want to, go ahead and just do good BQA practices. And what I mean by that is every time you go to your bottle, drop a new bottle, a new vaccine gun, put a new needle on it. So you're not going into that bottle with a contaminated needle. Does that make sense? So you just kind of got to play the situation by ear. But I am recommending changing needles if you have any record.
She got all A's in high school. I did not.
Do you see this anthrax on throughout the year?
All right, huh?
Is he supposed to say more droppy dry years?
Yes. A lot of times it's a drought year following a wet year, and sometimes it's a wet year following a drought year. Drought seems to be the most common.
Question back to the transportation of cattle, like if he was near this group of cattle with yours, how close would you have to be really concerned? Like if I picked up and moved some cattle near there to another location, I might be moving them 90 miles away. And with the incubation period of that week or so, I could be taking an infected animal to a whole new location and spreading it.
I think in all the cases that I've reviewed for the state, that has never been an issue where it's been spread laterally like that.
So as long as it's healthy when I load it, and that should be fine.
Correct.
The next location I'm going to, and would it be a good idea to maybe keep track of which ones came from that spot?
And it's always a good idea to keep track of where they come from and where they go. Is everybody comfortable with what would be asked of you if your herd should become affected by it? The steps, I know we've gone over it quite a little in different sections here, but just want to make sure everybody's underway with, treatment, vaccination. Just there's an approach to properly, quarantine for that.
We have some people here from the FSA office. In case you do have some death losses, they can maybe help you out. Talk a little closer to your
The livestock indemnity program is available for producers who did have some losses due to anthrax. So just contact the local FSA office, obviously Meade County. You want to file a notice of loss, typically within 30 days of when its first appearance. And there's also some forms here that will be required. It's a livestock indemnity veterinarian certification form. We'll have your vet fill out. You go out and verify if the loss was due to anthrax, verify the number lost, and basically have them sign it and return this to the office. Along with that, we would be beginning inventory, and then like I said, we can work on getting some payments out to you guys who have some losses. Any other questions, please let me know or contact your local FSA office and let them know as soon
One thing I forgot, if you're treating your calves and your cows and you run them through and you have a lump or swelling on them, don't lance it. We leave them alone. This year we're not gonna cut open abscesses and stuff. Swelling is a symptom of anthrax. They can get swelled up on the brisket, front of the bag, down the sheath. The one cow I cut open, it had swelling behind the shoulders. So swelling is a symptom of anthrax. So when you're working it through, you see something swollen underneath the jaw or the brisket, don't poke it. Probably give it a full dose of antibiotics. Maybe instead of the LA, maybe give it a full dose or a double dose of penicillin. But don't open them.
My name is Justin Gordon, I'm with NRCS, and I'm just gonna let you guys know too, if you do get affected and you have death loss, we can cost share burying animals. So we will do, if you're just doing a straight bury, we can do $70 a head for burying them. If you're gonna do a bury and a burn, we can up that quite a bit depending on the circumstances of that. So the big thing is though, before you do any work, talk to us. We can do an early start waiver, and obviously you want to get them buried as quick as possible. So call us, we'll come out hopefully within the day and look at the site, get that application early start waiver, and then we can get you paid down the road after the fact. So, you know, it's up to you guys. If you got one head, $70 might not be worth it, but if you start talking a few more head, it might be worth coming in and talking to us, and we can give you some cost share for doing that. Oh, and if anybody's here that lost some, I do have a couple applications and waivers with me today, so if you need it, we can get you signed up today.
So I just wanted to say, if someone lost, we have the district board of these two veterinarians here. Fantastic resource, great people. Use these guys for your information. They've done a fantastic job. Just want to give them a round of applause.
This wasn't as much fun as the last time I was here. Poker tournament. That didn't make anybody there, is it?
Yeah.